Hey guys, welcome back to another video on the channel, another miniature game from the recent Sharjah Masters 2025. My name is Michael Rahal. For those of you who are new to the channel, I'm an international chess master, also a FIDE coach and trainer, and working freelance for FIDE in many events, bringing you the best news and interviews from the top main tournaments. This is my English language channel. I also have a Spanish language channel, quite popular in Latin countries. And in this channel, I bring you the best miniature games, which are under 25, fast games, basically of classical format. This one, which I bring you today, is between two very strong grandmasters, playing with the white pieces, Sanal from Turkey. He's rated 25-55, which puts him in spot number 5 of the Turkey rank, which is very high for Turkey. He's an Olympic player, also called, by obvious reasons, the Harry Potter of chess. Vap is playing with the white pieces. I had the chance to interview Vap in Baku 2 years ago in the World Cup. That's on the FIDE channel on YouTube if you want to check it out. Nice guy, interesting interview. Some interesting stuff. With the black pieces, a player who's already appeared on this channel a couple of videos ago, sorry. Nicholas Theodorou from Greece. He's rated 26-11, very strong. Rated number 2 in Greece currently, another fully Olympic Greek player. What are we going to see in this game? We're going to see a structure called the hanging pawns. It's quite a popular structure which can arise from many different openings, both with white and with black. So it is a pawn structure we need to understand. Of course, both of these grandmasters understand it much better than I would ever understand it. But even so, we will see that one of them makes a fatal error in judgment and leaves his king too weak against his opponent's attacking forces, and that means disaster. So let's go with the game. Sanal is playing with the white pieces, opens with d4, and Theodorou plays knight f6, knight f3, d5, and for this game Sanal goes for e3, which normally initiates the Koye-Zukertort system, which would normally be played with bishop to d3, c5, and b3, followed by bishop to b2, castle. An interesting system played with the white pieces. Koye-Zukertort attack. However, Sanal mixes it up a bit, playing c4, which is a queen's gambit, but with the twist of leaving in the bishop on c1. We normally see the queen's gambit, the bishop is played out to g5 or to f4 before playing e3. Most of you who play d4 already know this. If you're playing the London system, then you're bringing it out on the second or third move. However, you can play this system. I checked with the theory, I checked with the computer. It's perfectly fine. However, it doesn't promise an advantage for white. If you play like this, black is normally going to equalize. Now, I suspect that Sanal obviously knows this and just wants to get a game sidestepping theoretical lines. That's my thoughts on his opening choice. Okay, so Theodorou plays bishop to e7, b3, castle, bishop to b2. White is just playing close to the vest, nothing very aggressive. Here there are different ways of playing. You can play c6, which is solid, although slightly passive. You can play b6, try and get your bishop on b7 as well. Maybe later on go for knight to e4. But the classical way of playing is to play c5, bringing about this 4-pawn structure. Now here, let me just give you a very brief knowledge on pawn tensions. This is something that's not very well spread out or explained in chess books, but any international master or grandmaster knows this perfectly well. So here we have a 4-pawn pawn tension. 4-pawn pawn tension. Generally, when there's 4 pawns in tension, one should exchange immediately one of the pairs of pawns to leave the opponent with the weakness. So, based on this theory of middle game pawn structures, white should be playing now pawn takes pawn, and if black recaptures with the pawn to keep a pawn in the center, white can consider d takes e5, leaving black with the isolated pawn, albeit quite a reasonable isolated pawn, but it is a small, slight pawn weakness. Of course, if white does go c takes d5, black can play knight takes c5, which would allow white eventually to occupy the center. Or there is c takes d4, specifically in this position, would be okay because of white's choice of playing b3 and bishop b2 instead of bishop to g5. So it's not clear cut that the capture would give white an advantage, but generally this is the way to go when there's a 4-pawn tension. However, if there's only a 2-pawn tension, which is the normal tension, then theory suggests that we shouldn't be exchanging unless it's something very specific, theoretically wise. Because if you exchange pawns here, you're not really exchanging the c pawn for the d pawn, you're actually exchanging the c pawn for the e pawn. Because by exchanging, these are the 2 pawns that disappear. And in general, black in this case would benefit from this exchange because releasing the tension, we've exchanged a pawn on the 4th, pawn on the 3rd, and we do now get extra chances with our bishop. So unless it's something very, very specific, winning a pawn, some opening idea, leaving the opponent with a bad piece, we normally keep the tension when there's a 1-pawn tension and exchange off tension when there's a 2-pawn tension. So here I would have played knight c3 or say c takes d5. Va played knight b to dt, which is okay, but not the most aggressive. Now, based on the theory I just explained before, black should take the opportunity to exchange off and leave white with either the hanging pawns or, if he decides to capture with the knight, then a weak d4 pawn on d4. But Theodorou plays knight to c6, allows white to play bishop to e2. Again, white could have exchanged on d5, trying to get the isolated pawn. And now, after bishop e2, now black does decide to exchange one of the pawns and keeps the tension. Now it's just a one square tension here. So for example, if white exchanges, black will not recapture with the pawn, he will recapture with the bishop and leave white with a pawn, weak pawn on c4. Isolated pawn from the other pawn. That could be a liability later on in the game. Of course, no one wins or loses games because of one weak pawn. But other things equal, this is a small advantage for black because of the white pawn. Okay, so white goes castle, bishop to b7, knight to b3. Now he is threatening to change on c5 and swap off the bishop. So now black takes on d4, and to avoid having a weak c pawn on c4, white recaptures, and now we have the hanging pawns. Now against the hanging pawns, basically the strength of the hanging pawns are the 2 open, semi-open files on the sides, along with the potential of unleashing attacking strength behind the pawns, as having these pawns on c4 and d4 gives us 12 squares behind the pawns to accumulate strength and potential to unleash by advancing one of the pawns. The weakness of the pawns is obvious. If we hit these pawns strong in front, we could win one of them, putting a lot of pressure on one of the pawns. And also, if we can force white to advance it, one of the pawns at a bad moment, we can either win the pawn or blockade the second pawn. For example, here, if we play something like this, let's just imagine we couldn't win the pawn, which possibly we could still go for a very decent blockade here, and this pawn could become weak later on. So, strengths and there's pros and cons with the weak or strong hanging pawns. You can find all of this in any decent middle game strategy book, and even though you don't have these hanging pawns in your repertoire, in your opening repertoire, it's still a good thing to know more or less how to deal with these pawn structures, because you never know when you can land in one of these positions, even if it's not in your opening repertoire. Queen to c7. Okay, I think a3 is okay. We want to put c2 under control to prevent knight to b4. However, I'm not sure if it's the only move for white in this position. And here black must decide how to deploy the rooks. So this could be one deployment, f on d8, a on c8. Another deployment could be the rook on d8 and the other rook on e8. It's hard to know which rook should go where here. You can use the Capablanca rule, who suggested to, in a sort of jokingly way, decide which rook you want to move and then move the other one. Which is because a lot of times we decide on a move with the rook and then we say after the game, oh, we should have moved the other rook. No, I just didn't know. So Capablanca jokingly said, well, think about which rook you want to move or which rook your intuition tells you to move and then move the other one. So maybe Theodorou thought that rook fd8 was the correct move and then he decided to move the other one. So this is just a joke, but in every joke there is a bit of truth. For example, if I knew that my opponent was going to put the queen on c2, I might have left this rook here to put it on c8. But this is what it is. Now, bishop to d6 is a very, very good move. This move, I thought, was exceptional and not at all obvious, bearing in mind that we just put a rook on d8 to pressure on the d4 pawn. This is an excellent move, which, by the way, wouldn't be possible if the knight on b3 would have been on c3, which is his normal square in these positions. So clearly we see here that the knight on b3 is misplaced. Look, we're hitting the h2 pawn, but more importantly, we vacate the e7 square to transfer the knight via e7 to f5 or maybe to g6 to hit on these squares here. We're transferring pieces to the king side. Rook fd1, unfortunate as we'll see later on, but this is the move that Sanal played. Knight to e7, already threatening to capture on f3, followed by bishop to h2. So we force g3, and now knight to f5. Not threatening anything, but already some sacrifices on g3 might be looming in the air. Rook to c1, and now the best move was knight to g4, but knight to e4 is also very strong. And now white should have brought his rook back to f1, recognizing his previous mistake and coming back to the defense. But it's very difficult for any player to move a rook and then retreat on the next move back. It's very difficult. I am totally sure, completely sure, because I know who Vahab Sanal is. He is an extremely good chess player. I'm completely sure that he realized there were some sacrifices in the air, but he thought, he calculated that his move, c5, which is a big blunder, he thought it was a correct move. I'm going to show you now what I think he missed. And if he, by any chance, sees this video, he might pop in and tell us himself. That would be very cool of him. But I more or less think I know what he missed based on my strength as a player and my understanding of these players, how they perform and calculate. I don't think he missed knight to f2, which is a huge destruction sacrifice. What I think he missed was a move which I'll show you now. First of all, what would have happened in the game? Sanal captured on d6, the normal move, the one he'd prepared. He can't capture the knight because the bishop lands on g3 and it's just mate in two moves. Check with the queen and mate with the knight. It's quite obvious that Sanal didn't miss this. He also didn't miss some ideas of not capturing the bishop. For example, king to f1, this drops his queen, and king to g1, we just continue with the sacrifice and bring the knight in and the queen in. One of the lines is quite funny. This one threatens bishop f3, And against c6, we use the knight again to kill him. He didn't miss these lines. These are quite clear. No, what he thought was that he could just take the bishop, and after queen takes, rook takes, he probably only calculated knight takes d1, bishop takes d1, and he has 2 pieces for a rook. He probably thought here that bishop to f3 was okay for him. No problem here. And he also probably thought that rook takes d6 or similar would allow him to consolidate, maybe with rook to c7, and he has 2 pieces for a rook. And what I think he missed was that here Theodorou played knight to e3, a very good move, hitting the bishop and the rook. After the rook moves, he takes the bishop and picks up the knight on f3, leaving black up with an extra exchange and a completely winning game. So I feel that Sanal missed the final knight to e3. In fact, after knight to e3, he decided to resign because there's no point in continuing at this level with a completely lost ending with an exchange and pawn down. I enjoyed this game. I learned 2 or 3 things which I didn't know. For example, I understood now that the knight on b3 is not a good placement when you have hanging pawns. It's a big problem, so be careful to have hanging pawns with the knight on b3. I also learned this maneuver, bishop to d6, knight e7, f5. I thought that was very good for the 2 bishops to coordinate on the diagonals, plus a knight going to f5. And of course, I know about the sacrifices on f2, but by analyzing these lines, I improved my calculation, and it also allowed me to try and force myself to spot hidden tactics further on in the calculation lines. Sanal lost this game because he missed one move which his opponent had seen. If you did enjoy the video, leave my comment below, and we'll see you very soon. When you see this video, I'll be on the road again, a few days outside my country, and when I get back, I'll post you some photos, or you can just check my social media and you can see where I'm been and what I'm up to. And when I get back, I'll leave you a few more videos because I'm flying to Batumi to the World Cup, to the Women's World Cup, and I'll be bringing you content from there, hopefully some cool videos and other interviews on the feeder channel. So we'll see you all very soon. As always, keep learning, keep improving, keep playing, and hope to see you on the board soon. See you in the next video.